The CEO invited me to lunch, but it wasn't just a friendly meal, as he had news. We were going in a different direction, he said. After building the entire tech division from scratch, I was being replaced by the owner's nephew. I smiled and nodded, replying calmly, "These things happen." What nobody knew was that I had seen it coming for months. My name's Derek. I'm 42 years old, and for the past 11 years, I've been the silent engine behind Riverton Manufacturing's IT operations. You wouldn't know it from the company website or our glossy quarterly reports, but I was there before we even had a real network. I built our cybersecurity framework back when we were still clinging to Windows XP, and passwords were literally stuck to monitors on post-it notes. I grew our help desk from a scrappy team of 5 into a well-oiled 30-person department that kept 3 production facilities humming around the clock. In Milwaukee, the machines don't sleep. And neither did I. Funny thing is, I wasn't supposed to stick around this long. After my divorce, I took the job just to keep myself occupied, something temporary while I figured out the next chapter. But I turned out to be damn good at it. Somewhere along the way, those servers, those networks, they stopped being just work. They became mine. Not on paper, but in all the ways that mattered. The lunch was at Maxwell's, one of those white tablecloth places where executives bring big clients they're trying to impress. Not the kind of spot you'd expect to get fired. But Preston Campbell, our CEO, was all about appearances. Image over everything? "Derek, you've been invaluable," he said, slicing into his steak like we were just two buddies chatting. "But we need fresh perspectives. Someone with a vision for where tech is headed." Translation: "Thanks for building the empire. Now hand over the keys." What Preston really meant was, we found someone cheaper. Someone who won't push back when the board makes questionable calls. Harrison's nephew, just out of MIT with a shiny master's in digital transformation. Brilliant, no doubt. Young, hungry, full of theories he hasn't yet watched crumble in real time. I nodded slowly, took a sip of water. "Who's handling the transition?" I asked. Preston looked almost relieved, like he'd been bracing for a scene. "You'll have 6 weeks. We're planning to announce after the next all hands." He slid an NDA across the table before dessert even arrived. I signed it without a word. Smiled, shook his hand, told him I understood. Business is business, after all. But when I got back to my desk, the signs were already there. My admin credentials? Downgraded. My name? Scrubbed from the leadership team mailing list. They'd pulled the trigger long before that lunch. Probably weeks ago. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from rage, though. Yeah, there was some of that. Not from fear about what came next. I've never had trouble landing on my feet. What kept me staring at the ceiling was what I'd seen in the server logs 3 months earlier. Tiny blips. Unauthorized access attempts. A curious little IP address that led me straight to the executive floor. Someone poking into systems that only I had reason to use. Digging through my documentation. Reviewing my security architecture, my contingency plans. They weren't just planning to replace me. They were extracting me. Every detail, every precaution, every safeguard I'd built. I moved to Milwaukee 16 years ago, chasing love and a fresh start. Ellie had gotten into grad school here, and I followed her from Minneapolis, giving up a solid cybersecurity role to build something new together. We were both young, hopeful, charging into the future like nothing could go wrong. Then one day, 7 years in, I came home to divorce papers on the kitchen counter. No warning, no big argument. Just, we want different things. That was it. When Riverton hired me, I was crashing on my brother's couch. They were reeling from a ransomware attack, desperate for someone, anyone, who could untangle the mess and patch their network together before the whole thing collapsed. I was never supposed to stay. It was a stopgap, a way to get back on my feet. But once I stepped into that mess of wires and half-functional systems, I saw potential. These guys knew machinery like the back of their hands, but computers? Not a clue. Their entire operation, millions in equipment, hundreds of jobs, was running on software so old it was practically fossilized. One serious crash and the whole thing would have gone up in smoke. So I made my pitch, a 5-year overhaul plan. I laid it all out for Preston, how we'd modernize everything from the ground up. To his credit, he said yes, gave me a budget and the freedom to work. And for the next 3 years, I barely saw daylight. I rebuilt every network, trained the staff, created backups, failovers, worst-case scenarios for every what-if I could imagine. When the Northeast blackout hit, we were the only facility in the region that stayed online. While others scrambled, we kept running like nothing happened. The board noticed. Suddenly, Preston was inviting me into meetings. My budget tripled overnight. I started hiring a team, not just warm bodies, but real talent. People like Vanessa, who became my right hand, and Louise, who could code circles around most senior engineers. We weren't just the IT department anymore. We were Riverton's competitive edge. The reason we could promise clients their orders would never be late. I still remember that moment at the company Christmas party in 2019. Harrison Wells, the majority owner, shook my hand with both of his. "You turned us into a modern operation," he said. "We couldn't have expanded without your systems." And I believed him. For the first time in a long time, I thought I'd found where I belonged, a place where I mattered. But then, last September, a hairline crack appeared. A consultant showed up unannounced, asking oddly basic questions about systems I'd personally designed. When I asked who brought him in, he vaguely said, "The executive team," and then changed the subject. A week later, I noticed my access to the board meeting minutes had quietly disappeared from the shared drive. The note said, "Server cleanup." Sure. By December, our weekly briefings, the ones Preston and I had like clockwork, started getting canceled, always with a polite excuse. Holidays, scheduling conflicts, other priorities. At the New Year leadership retreat, I overheard Harrison talking about his nephew. "Brilliant with computers," he said. "Silicon Valley's trying to steal him away." I smiled at the time. Didn't think twice. I should have. The real gut punch came a few weeks later. Vanessa told me she'd been invited to a strategic planning session, one I should have been leading. She said when she brought up my name, Preston just changed the subject, dodged it. "Something felt off," she said, "like they were planning around you." I brushed it off. "I've always been loyal to a fault," my ex used to say. 2 days after that lunch at Maxwell's, I found myself in the server room at 7 p.m. Most of the building had emptied out, just a few lights glowing in the hallways. But there, in the soft hum of machines and cool whir of the fans, I felt at peace. These racks, these blinking lights, this rhythm of power and data, they were mine. Every cable chosen, every redundancy tested, every piece of hardware configured by my hands. I'd built it all. This was my space. I ran my hand along the edge of the main console. 11 years of my life were tucked away behind these walls. Countless late nights, missed holidays, the glow of server lights replacing the warmth of a home. I turned, and there he was, Nathan Blake, Harrison's golden boy nephew. Clean-cut, fresh-faced, all casual confidence and designer watch. He couldn't have been older than 30. "Just routine checks," I said, my voice neutral. "You need something?" "Getting the lay of the land," he replied, stepping inside like he already owned the place. "Preston mentioned you'd be showing me around soon." "Did he?" I asked, eyebrows raised. Nathan wandered deeper into the room, eyeing the racks. "Impressive setup. A bit old school, but solid." "Old school. I'd overhauled these systems 8 months ago." "Your documentation is thorough," he continued. "Been reading through your protocols?" "I have some ideas for modernization." He said it like he was offering me a favor. Like this was all just a little cleanup job before the new sheriff took over. "Looking forward to hearing them," I managed to say. The words sat heavy on my tongue, like chalk. When he left, I sat down hard at my workstation and opened the access logs. Nathan's account had been created 3 weeks before that lunch with Preston. He already had full administrative access. He'd read through everything, my documentation, my protocols, my notes. They didn't just plan to push me out. They were already halfway through the process before I even knew. I took out my phone and texted Luis. "Can you meet tomorrow before work?" "Joe's, 6:30. That night, I drove out to the lakefront, parked in the same spot where Ellie and I used to sit and watch the sun disappear behind the water. Now the lake was still and black beneath the winter sky. I thought about the day Preston had promoted me to director, how proud I'd been. "You're the backbone of this place," he'd said. "We couldn't run without you." Turns out backbones are easy to replace. Luis was already at Joe's when I arrived the next morning, slumped over a cup of coffee, dark circles under his eyes. He didn't need to hear it. He already knew. "They're phasing me out," I said, not bothering with small talk. He nodded slowly. "I figured. They've been asking weird questions, having me walk through your systems the last couple weeks." He looked down at his coffee. "I'm sorry, man. I should have told you." "I don't blame you," I said. He had kids, a mortgage. I knew the math he'd done in his head. "What's your plan?" he asked. Funny thing, I hadn't thought I had one. But as I watched early morning commuters blur past the window, something shifted. A stillness. A kind of clarity I hadn't felt since the day Ellie left. "They think everything's in the documentation," I said, voice low. "But we both know it's not." Luis leaned forward, eyes sharp now. "The proprietary tools, the workarounds." I nodded. "The patches I built that don't live in any manual. The custom monitoring systems. The client interface no one else understands fully." He paused. "Derek, I'm not going to sabotage anything." "I'm not sabotaging anything," I told Luis. "But I'm not handing over what's mine either." He looked at me for a long moment, then gave a slow, quiet nod. He got it. "I need copies of everything I built myself," I said, "and I need to know who's still loyal." He didn't ask questions, just nodded again. The official announcement came during the all-hands meeting the following week. Preston stood up at the podium in the conference center, voice steady, face composed. He talked about exciting transitions and fresh perspectives, the usual empty language that meant little and explained less. Beside him, Nathan stood with his hands folded neatly in front of him, nodding at the right moments, smile polite but rehearsed. Derek has been instrumental in building our IT infrastructure, Preston said, carefully avoiding eye contact. And we're grateful for his contributions as he helps us transition to Nathan's leadership over the next 6 weeks. Murmurs rippled through the room. My team looked stunned. Vanessa's eyes locked on mine from across the sea of chairs. A silent question. I gave her the smallest of nods. After the meeting, I requested a one-on-one with Preston and HR. No emotion, just business. I laid it out plainly. Some of the systems Nathan was inheriting had been built entirely outside of Riverton's work hours, developed on my own machines, using my own development framework. The employment contract is clear, said Diane from HR, sliding a well-worn document across the table. Anything developed during your tenure is company property. Not everything, I replied, just as calmly. System Sync, the interface you've built half your client services around, was developed before I even joined Riverton. I licensed it to the company, but I retained ownership. It's right there in the original agreement. Preston shifted in his seat. That hit home. That was 10 years ago, Derek, he said. The company has evolved. So has System Sync, I countered. Every update, every integration, it's all built on my original codebase. I maintained that. I improved it. And I never transferred ownership. I'm not asking for a fight. I just want proper compensation for my intellectual property. They didn't have a response ready for that. Preston and Diane exchanged a glance. We'll look into it, Preston said finally. In the meantime, Diane added, with her practiced HR tone, we'd appreciate it if you'd focus on the transition with Nathan. I nodded, calm, composed, but I'd already started playing a different game. I knew that look, the one Preston gave Diane, the tight, professional nod, the polite delay. They were stalling. The next morning, my access to the development servers was restricted. An automated email appeared in my inbox. Security protocol during transition periods. Right. Then Nathan scheduled a team meeting, without me. I showed up anyway, walked in mid-sentence. He was standing at the whiteboard, marker in hand, already halfway into a presentation. He paused when he saw me at the door. Derek, he said with a practiced smile. Glad you could join us. I was just outlining some changes to the network architecture. I leaned against the frame. Interesting. Which architecture specifically? The main production floor systems, Wamai, he said, sounding confident. We're going to streamline the protocols. My voice stayed calm. Those protocols prevent machine failures under peak load. They're custom designed for our equipment. Nathan's smile flickered, tightened. Modern systems don't require such complex workarounds, he replied. They're not workarounds. Vanessa cut in, sharp and clear. They're necessary adaptations for our hardware. Derek designed them after the 2018 failure. The room went still, eyes shifting. Someone coughed. Nathan hesitated, then recovered. Well, I appreciate the historical perspective, but we're moving forward with the streamlining. He turned back to the whiteboard just like that, like I wasn't even there. Later that day, I got an email from legal. The company was asserting full ownership over all systems I'd ever developed, including System Sync. They cited a vague clause buried in the contract about integrated technologies, defaulting to company property. And then came the insult. They were offering me a $5,000 technology acquisition bonus. $5,000 for the backbone of their operations. But the real betrayal came the next morning. Luis messaged me. Nathan had scheduled one-on-one meetings with the entire IT team. Not transition briefings, full-blown evaluations. He was deciding who to keep. Luis wrote, he asked if your systems were really necessary or just overly complicated. Phishing. That night, I checked my personal email and found a message from one of our longtime suppliers, confused about a new licensing agreement Riverton had sent them. Something about third-party support. I opened the document. Preston had signed a deal transferring all my custom supplier integrations, every API, every automation, to a third-party vendor. The vendor was a startup, owned by Nathan's former classmate. They weren't just phasing me out. They were dismantling everything I'd built, selling it off piece by piece, lining each other's pockets on the way out. When I tried to access the backup servers to recover my original source code, I got the message I expected. Access denied. Credentials revoked. Fine. Game on. I needed leverage, and I needed it fast. Because Riverton hadn't just been careless. They hadn't been careless. They'd been calculating. The timeline was finally coming into focus. Nathan hadn't been some last-minute hire. He'd been brought in months ago, digging through my systems, absorbing my documentation, learning everything he needed to make me obsolete, quietly preparing for a takeover while extracting every bit of knowledge I had. That night, I reached out to Darren Phillips, a network security specialist I used to work with back in Minneapolis, someone I trusted. We met at a diner off the highway, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and lukewarm coffee, the kind of place Preston would never be caught dead in. Legally, you're in a tough spot. Darren said after I laid it all out, But there's something that doesn't add up. Why now? The company's doing well. That's what I can't figure out, I admitted. Let me dig around, he offered. Nothing invasive, just some info gathering. 2 nights later, he called me at 11:03 p.m. You need to see this. He'd found SEC filings, public but buried. Riverton was prepping for acquisition. A conglomerate out of Boston called TechCore Industries was in late-stage talks to buy them out. And the deal? It hinged on two things: modernized technical infrastructure and transitional leadership. They're cleaning house to make the sale look better, Darren said flatly. And your systems? They're a major selling point. The valuation explicitly mentions the proprietary manufacturing interface. I didn't need him to say the name, System Sync. But he wasn't done. Harrison Wells cashed out most of his shares last quarter. Preston and the exec team are the ones cashing in now. They get golden parachutes, guaranteed leadership roles at TechCore. I didn't respond. The piece that hit me hardest, Darren continued gently, was the email thread I found in the metadata archive. Preston and Harrison started planning your replacement over 6 months ago. 6 months ago. While I was pulling all-nighters during that major security breach, sleeping on the server room floor, fixing a firewall vulnerability that could have taken down 3 facilities, they were out interviewing Nathan. When the call ended, I couldn't sit still. I drove out to the old industrial park on the edge of the city, the place I'd sat with a notebook and coffee years ago, sketching the early framework for what would become System Sync. Back when it was just an idea in my head and a dream of doing something that mattered. I parked in the shadow of an abandoned warehouse and watched the sky bleed from black to gray. At dawn, I went home and dug through my closet, found an old external hard drive wrapped in a hoodie, plugged it in and waited. There it was, the original System Sync code. Pre-Riverton, time-stamped, fully documented, 8 months before I ever signed a Riverton contract. And then, like a bitter cherry on top, I found the emails. Preston himself, specifically requesting I'd found it. Preston's email, clear as day. I'll integrate System Sync with Riverton's platforms, he wrote. Let's circle back in Q3 to formalize the ownership side of things. My tool, his acknowledgement, his promise. I'd trusted him. Fool me. The next day, Nathan called me into a meeting with Preston and Diane from HR. Their faces told me everything before they even spoke. We're accelerating the transition, Preston said, skipping the pleasantries. Your last day will be next Friday. 2 weeks instead of 6, I said calmly. Any particular reason? Nathan has demonstrated exceptional capability, Diane said with that HR smile that never quite reaches the eyes. And frankly, Derek, your attitude hasn't been conducive to a smooth handover. I gave a slow nod. I see. We'll need you to complete all documentation and training by Wednesday, Nathan added, like it was just another line item. Of course, I said, voice steady. And the ownership of System Sync? Have you had time to review the original agreements? Preston's jaw tightened. Our legal team has determined that all integrated systems fall under company ownership. The separation package is generous, Derek. I suggest you take it. I stood. I'll have my lawyer review everything. Preston's expression darkened. Don't make this difficult. It won't change the outcome. I didn't answer. Just walked out and pulled out my phone. Text to Luis. Plan B. Tonight. 7 hours later, we met in the dim parking lot of a grocery store, the sodium lights buzzing overhead. Luis handed me a flash drive, his face pale, serious. Everything you asked for, he said quietly. Original code bases, deployment logs, authentication keys. I closed my fingers around it. Why are you helping me? He looked me in the eye, no hesitation. Because they think we're all replaceable. That weekend I worked like I hadn't in years. Not building, documenting. Every version of System Sync from the pre-Riverton era. Every email between Preston and me. The licensing agreement that clearly stated I retained ownership. Timestamps, code diffs, contracts. A paper trail with no missing pieces. Monday morning, I got in early. Vanessa was already at her desk, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. You heard about the timeline? She asked. I nodded. How's the team handling it? Not well, she said, rubbing her temples. Nathan called emergency planning meetings all weekend. Tried to reverse engineer your monitoring system. I raised an eyebrow. How'd that go? She lowered her voice. It didn't. 3 alerts from the production floor got missed. Anyone hurt? No, but they had to shut down line 3 for 4 hours. Cost the company about $40,000 and missed a major delivery window. I kept my face neutral. Sorry to hear that. Vanessa hesitated. I think I'm next. Nathan's been asking if my role is necessary. I'd suspected as much. Vanessa wasn't just sharp. She knew how everything actually worked. That made her dangerous to people like Preston. Do you trust me? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. She nodded instantly. Yeah, I do. She didn't even hesitate. I slid a sealed envelope across her desk and said, if anything strange happens this week, anything at all, open this. It explains everything. That same afternoon, I met with 3 different patent attorneys. I paid extra to rush the paperwork for provisional patents on the core parts of System Sync. Not the entire system, just the pieces that made it actually work with real-world manufacturing equipment. By Tuesday, I had finished all the transition documents Nathan had asked for. I attended his planning meeting, answered every question calmly, professionally. On the surface, I looked like the perfect employee. Meanwhile, Darren was helping me set up a secure server offsite. By midnight, I'd moved all my original code to that server and built a standalone version of System Sync. It didn't rely on Riverton's infrastructure at all. It was mine now, fully independent. Wednesday morning, I found an email waiting in my personal inbox. It was from TechCore Industries. They invited me to meet at their regional office to discuss mutual business interests. Apparently, word had gotten out that I was leaving Riverton, and someone at TechCore wanted to explore what I could offer them. Smart move, they were hedging their bets. I forwarded the email to my lawyer just to be safe, then called TechCore's VP of Operations directly. I suggested we meet after my official last day at Riverton. He didn't hesitate, said yes immediately. That night, I put the final piece of my plan into action. Using credentials Luis had once saved, back when we trusted each other, I updated 3 essential components of System Sync. First, I added a digital signature check to make sure no one could modify the code without being detected. Then I changed the license so it would expire in exactly 8 days, the day after my last one at Riverton. It wasn't sabotage. I didn't break anything. The system would keep running smoothly as long as a proper licensing agreement was signed. It was a clean legal handoff, just a way to protect what I had built. On Thursday, Nathan called me into his office. "Some people on the team say you've been acting a little off," he said. "Anything you want to tell me?" "Just focused on wrapping things up," I replied, keeping my tone calm and steady. He looked at me for a moment, clearly trying to read between the lines. "We're changing all system passwords and access credentials," he finally said. "Tomorrow, after your departure," Nathan said. "Standard procedure." "Makes sense," I replied, "though it won't affect the core functionality of System Sync." He narrowed his eyes. "Meaning?" "Just that the system was built to run smoothly, even if admin credentials change. That's part of its strength." I watched him carefully, saw him trying to figure out if I was warning him or simply being informative. He chose wrong. "I think we're good here," he said eventually and waved me off. "Legal will handle your final paperwork tomorrow." As I stepped out of his office, I passed Preston in the hallway. He barely acknowledged me, just a small nod after 11 years working side by side. That was it. 11 years boiled down to a nod. By midnight, everything was ready. I sent one last message to my private server. Verification sequence Alpha 7 complete. The countdown had started. Friday morning, I handed in my badge, signed the exit paperwork, and politely turned down the farewell lunch Nathan had organized. Preston looked relieved. Didn't even bother hiding it. While I was walking to my car, Luis called. "It's done," he said. "Nathan just changed all the admin passwords. They're doing a full system review this afternoon." "Thanks for letting me know," I said, keeping my tone steady. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we wait." That weekend, I stayed home, ignored every call from unknown numbers, slept better than I had in months. Then came Monday. At exactly 9:17 a.m., right when Riverton's production floor reached peak operation, every single System Sync screen in all 3 of their facilities displayed the same message. "License expired. Please contact the developer to renew." By 9:20, the first production line was down. By 9:45, the entire operation across all locations had come to a grinding halt. At 10:30, Preston called. "What the hell did you do?" he snapped. He was trying to sound like he was in control, but I could hear the panic in his voice. "I didn't do anything," I replied calmly. "The software license expired. As the developer and owner of System Sync, I'm happy to discuss renewal terms." "This is sabotage," he hissed. "It's standard license management," I said. "You should check the original integration agreement from 11 years ago. Clause 7 clearly states Riverton was licensing the technology. You never owned it." Silence. "I've already sent the updated licensing agreement to your legal team," I added. "The terms are straightforward. Acknowledgement of my ownership, proper compensation for continued use, and a non-disclosure agreement regarding the details of my departure." "That's extortion." "That's business," I replied. "Happens every day." By 3 p.m., their legal team had reviewed my documentation. By 5 p.m., the agreement was signed. 3 days later, I was sitting across from the VP of Operations at TechCore in their downtown office. He slid a contract across the table. "We're still going through with the Riverton acquisition," he said, "but we want you to lead the technical integration. As a consultant, not an employee." The offer on the table was double what Riverton had paid me. Full control over my hours. Full control over where I worked from. "What about Nathan?" I asked. The VP's expression darkened slightly. "Mr. Blake will be transitioning to other opportunities." I signed the contract that same afternoon. 2 weeks later, Louise called with an update. Nathan had been quietly removed from his position. The official line was that he'd pursued other opportunities. The real reason? 3 major clients had threatened to pull their contracts after repeated system failures. Preston stayed on as CEO through the TechCore acquisition, but it was all smoke and mirrors. His new role was mostly symbolic. No authority, no team. Just a glossy title and an office far from where the real decisions were being made. I didn't feel triumphant like I thought I might. No rush of revenge or pride. Just a quiet, grounded certainty that I had done what needed to be done. The next month, I used my first consulting check to put a down payment on a small cabin by the lake. It wasn't extravagant, just a peaceful spot with a deck that looked out over the water. A place where I could sit and watch the sunset, and then the sunrise. 3 months in, Vanessa joined my consulting team. Then Luis. Eventually, half of my old department was working with me, not under me. We were partners now, building something new together, something on our terms. About a year after everything went down, I ran into Preston at a restaurant downtown. He saw me and started to turn away, but then changed his mind and walked over to my table. "You won," he said, just like that. No build-up, no bitterness. I studied him for a second, really looked. There was strain around his eyes, and his suit was a little rumpled. He looked tired, older, worn down. "It wasn't about winning," I said quietly, and I meant it. "It was about value, knowing what you're worth." He gave a small nod, said nothing else, and walked away. I sat there for a while after that, watching the city lights flicker on across the river, thinking about systems, the ones we build, the ones we break, and the ones that keep going long after we're gone.